Welcome, welcome on this week before Thanksgiving. We are really excited to be talking to you today. Today, we're going to be talking about scheduling closings. We're talking about the closing day today. So this is the day when the parties must be ready, able, and willing to close right there at the table. Here we mean the seller and the buyer. Everyone else is just the assistants in the transaction, okay? So let's kick this off. Orsolya, how hard is it to schedule a closing?
It's unbelievably hard, frustrating, and time consuming. So I don't know why the real estate industry hasn't come up with a better method of scheduling. But for now, so far, my experience is that we are all over the place. So we are not really, and I'm in the industries, we are not really organized as any other corporate entity. You just send a calendar invite and then everybody can just pick their dates and times when they are available. No, we do it the old-fashioned way. What does that mean? So in order to schedule a closing, we need to coordinate. And mostly the coordination is done via email. Yep. So everyone has to be available on the same day and at the same time. And there are quite a few people who will have to come together at one closing table and be ready, willing, and able to close. Here are a couple of examples how it's done. Some firms, whoever takes the lead on scheduling the closing, they may send out a group email where everyone who has to be at the email is CC'd, and then they are waiting for responses so everyone can see each other's availability. And then hopefully by email number 15, we will narrow it down to one or two dates, and then one of those dates is picked and locked in. And then obviously someone else will come up with email number 16 or 17 that, oh, I'm sorry, I already have something scheduled, so we need to reschedule it. Yeah, that happens quite often. So that's one way. Another way to do it is whoever is responsible in the firm for scheduling the closing might reach out to individuals on a one-on-one basis, get their availability, dates and times, and then puts all the information together and sends out a final confirmation for the email. And again, it may happen that someone comes back that, hey, I have already something else. Could we reschedule it? Who is doing the scheduling of this? In most firms, it's the paralegal, but in small, mid-sized firms, and depending on the relationship between client and attorney, it might be on the attorney's shoulder to pull the closings together. So again, this was how closing scheduling has been done so far. I don't know, Dalia, do you have different experience or anything to add?
I just want to reiterate, it's true what you're saying about the emails. There's so many emails back and forth trying to schedule this. I'm actually today, as we sit here, waiting for some people to get back to me because I'm trying to schedule a closing for next week. It's really tough. It's the week of Thanksgiving. I need to close right after, and I'm just waiting on people to let me know what day is good, what time is good. And I got a call this morning asking me what's going on. So it's definitely a juggle, I would say, to get the date locked in. That's definitely a challenge we're all having, especially as the attorneys, making sure that all the relevant people are there. Lots of people who wish to be there are available, but we really need the essential parties there. So I agree with you. It can get very frustrating. Yeah, that's my 2 cents there.
Thanks, Dalia. You know what? Talk me through also a little bit. When it comes to scheduling, are there any dates and timelines or urgency that is usually respected by the parties? So is there any way to put pressure on all the parties that, hey, we really need to close by this and this date? Are there any circumstances?
Yes. Good thing you asked. Absolutely. Aside from the actual on or about date in the contract, which we really want to try to stick to, and aside from just the excitedness of getting into your new house or selling your house so you can move to Florida or whatever it is you're going to be doing, aside from all that, we have some real urgencies that dictate when we really need to have that closing by. One of those is the mortgage rate expiration. So the buyers will have a set date on which their mortgage rate does expire, and they risk a higher interest rate at that point. They risk fees being involved. So that's definitely something as the buyer's attorney, I'm going to pay very close attention to, and I'm not going to want to blow that date, especially if one date has already expired or passed and the mortgage bank maybe has waived the fee or extended the rate just out of courtesy. That's definitely something I'm going to keep in mind as the buyer's attorney. There also may be a subsequent purchase in the equation, right? So maybe the seller needs to close because they need the proceeds so that they can close on a property that they're buying. So this is a complex situation where one sale is dependent on another. That's always very complicated because those two closings might, the seller's purchase closing may already be scheduled. And if he doesn't or she doesn't close on their house to sell prior to that, then they're in a situation now where they have to show up to a closing with no money. Never a good look, Orsolya. So we definitely want to avoid that. Another one is often holidays, like I just described to you. I'm having this week, right? So it's going to be a holiday weekend here. So, but we're ready to close, and I have a rate expiration date coming up. And so I have to work around everybody's holiday plans for Thanksgiving. And next month it'll be other holidays. So, particularly religious holidays, they can have a real impact on when people can close. Parties are traveling for the holidays, they have family coming over. Whatever the case is, that's definitely something we want to make sure that we take into account, even at the contract phase, because a lot of people tell me, I want to close by the end of the year, and then they have an on or about close date of right around the holidays, and they're expecting to close on December 29th, but who's really around, right? So it's a whole big juggling act. Holidays and religious days are definitely another one to consider. Something that's been coming up even more so are pregnancy due dates, right? So people who are expecting a family, a young couple, they're trying to move in definitely before their due date, right? Before their baby's born. And so they need a little leeway. They want to get their house set up. That's something to consider. Another one, which I had not too long ago, was a seller who was very ill. So if the house is in someone's name and they are very ill and they're trying to sell, and you don't want to have to transfer this and make it into an estate sale now, you want to make sure that you get your closing scheduled as soon as possible so that the ownership stays as is and we're not having to go into probate in the middle of this deal. So all these things really create that urgency more than just like, well, I want to close on this date, or I'd really like to be in the house on that date. Can you think of anything else to add, Orsolya?
I have a thought, but it's exactly the contrary what you were just describing. So very often what we see is the not urgency, like it's not urgent. It's rather like I need more time, especially coming from the seller, because in some instances, for example, some lenders are really quick to get their documents together for the purchaser, and we have a clearance to close pretty quickly. And then the seller might be in a position that, oh, okay, I understand the buyer is ready to close, but I am not, because on the date of closing, I have to be out of this apartment or of this house. So sometimes it might be, for example, the move of the seller might be a hindrance to close. So even though the buyer is already ready to close, the seller might need more time because either they haven't lined up anything to rent, or they haven't identified the next house they are moving in, or they haven't closed, or they are not even ready to close on the next house. So sometimes it can be a hindrance from the seller's side that we're not ready to close. Obviously, there might be some other issues regarding the buyer, but most often what we see is that the seller is not ready because they have nothing lined up. Obviously, there are other solutions to that, like a post-closing occupancy, but this is something we're going to be discussing in another podcast. That's that from me.
Good point. Good point. Actually, I wanted to mention I kind of have a situation like this right now where I have a couple who is selling their house and buying another house. And rather than selling their house first and then using that money to buy the new house, they've done it in the reverse order. So they are in the process of buying a new house. They've taken out a mortgage. They still have the mortgage on the current house. And so they will buy the new house, and then we are simultaneously in contract to sell. So for them, they might be thinking, the longer I kind of drag out the house purchase, the less time I'm paying two mortgages. So that's a good example of what you were just describing of like timing it in that way.
Correct.
It's definitely happening, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So can we just break it down now as to the closing day? Who is it that has to be at the closing table, Orsolya?
So who are these people that we have to get together for the same time and the same day? You know what, Dalia? I'm going to be talking about only co-ops. And then why don't you take over after that to talk about condos and houses? So we separate.
Yep.
Okay, good. Let's do it.
Absolutely. Yep.
So co-ops, here we start. Scheduling of closing starts when the board interview has taken place and it has been successful. To be honest, I do like to get a feel even before the co-op interview, because usually scheduling a co-op interview itself is already prolonging the whole transaction process. And I know that the parties are impatient to get this transaction closed as soon as possible. So I sort of throw out my fillers beforehand and make some inquiries about parties' availability, willingness, openness, and start a conversation about plans. Okay, so when we know this is the date the co-op interview is happening, how quickly do you want to close afterwards? So it's nothing really concrete. It's more like getting a feel for it. The most important participant, apart from the seller and the buyer at the closing table when it comes to a co-op, is the transfer agent. The transfer agent is the absolute key. Who is the transfer agent? So it's either the management of the cooperative building, and the management company has an employee who is dedicated to do the closings, or the co-op has an attorney, and then the co-op's attorney will be acting as a transfer agent. What you need to understand, for example, in a management company usually works with a number of buildings. A co-op attorney will not only be a transfer agent for that one particular co-op, but they will be also attorney on a number of other deals and transactions and with clients. So looking at it from this perspective, most likely the transfer agent, whether it's management company or co-op attorney, will be the most busy people and the hardest to nail down. Okay, so you get the availability, and whatever availability they are sending to you, the person who is trying to schedule the closing will be your mantra, and you will go by those dates and you will go by those times when you are offering it up to parties. Also, what I said before, transfer agents do not like to be included in this scheduling group emails because it can get quite heavy to get people on the same board. So usually you get the availabilities and then you inform all the parties. Now, who else has to be at the table? Obviously the seller, the buyer, the attorney for the seller, the attorney for the buyer. Then if the buyer has taken out a mortgage, then the buyer's lender's attorney will come to the table. And if the seller has to pay off a mortgage, an existing mortgage, then the buyer's lender's attorney or representative will have to be at the closing table physically, because they are going to bring the seller's stock certificate and proprietary lease, which they will be tendering in exchange of the payoff check. Okay, so there will be an exchange of money in exchange of the certificate and the proprietary lease, which is originally held by the seller's lender. So therefore, they are really important to be at the table. Okay, in addition to that, we have the transfer agent. So those are the parties who will have to be part of the closing and be at the closing table. To specifics, we will talk in a different episode about power of attorney, because in certain instances, sellers and buyers may be represented through power of attorneys. In those cases, they do not need to be at the closing table, but we will talk about this in another episode. And the final one regarding co-ops, when it comes to a co-op, the parties, sellers and buyers, are signing the so-called transfer documents, which we will talk again in another episode what are transfer documents, but there is no title agent who would be supervising the signing of the transfer documents. And now, Dalia, over to you. Who is at the closing table when it comes to condos and houses?
Okay, it's a little less complex when we're dealing with condos and houses, thankfully, because that's what I mostly deal with. But co-ops are definitely interesting. So if we're coming in at a table for a condo or a house, in the case of a condo, we will need the condo management company, their own set of documents, their own requirements, things that need to be signed. So the management company is going to have their set of documents. We're also going to have a title closer, right? So throughout the condo and house purchase process, we have dealt with a title company, hopefully a really good one. And they have cleared title. They have done all the verifications, all the checks on the parties, on the house, on the property. They've done the survey, all that kind of stuff. And they're here to have their various documents signed by the buyers. And then they're also going to be providing and presenting the buyers with their new title insurance. So that's really important. The title closer is also the person who will a lot of times be the person making the copies of everything, checking to make sure that all the documents are correct. They're going to mail the tax documents, mail the checks. They do a lot of that kind of stuff, all the checks and things that need to be mailed out, any documents that need to be sent to the government, whatever the case is, the title closer will do that. Also, at the table, we will need the attorneys for both the parties, the seller's attorney, the buyer's attorney. Whether I represent the seller or the buyer, I'm coming there with documents for them to sign. And so everyone needs their attorney there, because you will, guaranteed, you will have questions about what you are signing and what you are looking at, because chances are this is, even if it's the fifth time you're looking at it, you need things explained to you. Everything has to be explained, all the ACRIS documents. I show you where on the deed you are listed as the new owners. I want you to feel comfortable that you didn't just show up and sign a bunch of documents, sign your life away, and you don't even understand what it is. So we make you a folder, we put everything in it, I put the most important things up front, things like that. So your attorney is really important to be there with you. Another attorney who's there will be the bank attorney or the bank representative if the buyers have a mortgage. So they're going to have a big stack of papers. They're going to hand it to the buyer's attorney. If I'm the buyer's attorney, I'm going to go through that package with them. I'm going to explain to them all the pages. This is your note. This is your mortgage. This is a copy of your loan application, whatever the case is. So the bank representative is the one giving that to us, taking it back, making sure everything has been signed, initialed, stamped in blood, whatever they need to get that loan put through. Someone else that needs to be there is going to be a notary. Usually that's going to be the title closer or the bank representative. I personally bring my notary stamp. I try to bring it whenever I go to a closing, because I was in a situation one time where the title closer or the bank's forgotten their stamp. So it's never a bad idea to have your stamp if you have it, okay, if you are a notary, which I am. So I use that to my advantage. Sales agents, your real estate agent, they are sometimes there. They are not required to be there, but they do get paid on that day at closing. There's going to be a check for them. And so a lot of times the broker will send someone to collect that check. They are not required to be there. They can certainly pick up that check from wherever, usually their client's attorney's office, or they can ask to have it mailed, whatever the case is. And finally, the most important people who need to be at this closing are all of the buyers and the sellers. If your name is on that contract, you need to be at that table unless you have given someone else power of attorney to sign for you. Okay, let's say you're out of the country, you can't be there, whatever the case is, you simply give whoever it is, maybe your spouse is going to be there. Maybe whoever you're giving power of attorney for, just for the purpose of signing these contracts for you. This is something that needs to be done in advance. The power of attorney form has to be approved, maybe by the title company, the bank, whatever the case is, so that because these documents that we're signing go to the bank, they go to the title companies, they have to be approved by them. If the power of attorney is no good, then this person cannot sign for you. So my quick story is I had a closing and it was 3 buyers. One of them did not show up. However, the 2 showed up, and one of the 2 had a letter from the third non-appearing buyer, and it just said, I give permission to this person to sign all my closing documents for me. And that buyer signed it at the bottom and gave it to one of the 2 buyers that did show up. It was not notarized. It was not a power of attorney in any way, shape, or form. And I absolutely appreciated the effort. However, I really wish that they had told me just even the day before that they needed to do that, because I would have helped them with that. So that was an issue where not all the buyers and sellers were there. So definitely those are the most important. Those are the most important to be there for houses or condo closings. Orsolya, is there any situation where no one has to come to the closing table?
Sort of yes and no. It's called a remote closing, and this has been the practice during COVID quite some time. But let's talk about that at another time, because we are running out of time here, and it takes quite a bit of explanation how a remote closing can be conducted. And it's actually a good practice and often preferred.
Great topic for another episode. I love it.
Correct. Okay, but right now, as I mentioned, we're running out of time here. So I just would like to finish with wishing you all the best and a tremendous amount of patience to scheduling a closing. If you are a seller or a buyer, be respectful towards the person who is trying to schedule your closing. It is a really, really hard job. Be flexible and cooperate, okay? That is how you will arrive at the table and you will rock the closing if you show flexibility, cooperation, and respect. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode, and we are looking forward to having you at our next session of Rock the Closing.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Rock the Closing. This podcast is hosted by real estate attorneys who offer valuable insights. Please remember that the content is for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. Always consult a qualified professional before making any decisions. This podcast is copyrighted by Rock the Closing, and any reproduction, syndication, or rebroadcasting of the content requires written permission.